I missed it. Let's see. Okay. 24. 25. That is the largest pulse I have been able to find. That is outrageous. And you know, you should see the data that comes out with this. When you see the graphs of like electron production and negative ion production and all this, everything just peaks right out. It's outrageous. Look at the deformation that is going on the surface of the sun. Look at these bumps. It's like completely warping the surface of the sun. That is a lot of energy. That is a lot of energy.
Why do you think?
Like I said, I think that the sun is going through its cycle where it's actually starting to become unbalanced because it's going too slow for the amount of energy in it, and it's starting to get ready to release some of that energy. And, you know, the result would be, you know, huge energy would be released into a solar system, which we're experiencing right now. Our weather is going to change. It's going to get real hot, you know, and as well, the plasma that's ejected could easily reorganize in smaller planets and change the dynamics of the planets together. So there's many things that can happen there.
Can you say more about Jupiter?
Well, there's not that much more to say about Jupiter other than that hotspot has been growing for the last year and a half, and at this point it's emitting a lot of energy in X-ray and infrared and all this. It's not visibly ignited yet, like it's not doing fire yet, but it's getting hotter and hotter, and it's getting bigger and bigger very quickly, especially as the sun is going more berserk.
And that's like never been seen before.
No, they have no explanation for it.
If Jupiter is actually in the process of igniting and turning into a star, do you think that there's a possibility of a sympathetic vibration between the sun and Jupiter to actually bring that about?
Create a balance?
Yeah.
They could be.
Distance away, but
yeah.
A lot of energy too.
Yeah, it's a lot of energy, and they're two fairly large objects, and they both output a lot of energy. Jupiter outputs 90% more energy than it receives from the sun, from some kind of internal energy source, which I believe is a black hole. So, yeah, definitely, all objects, you know, are always in sympathetic resonance to each other, and always tend towards stability and equilibrium. So there would be a reorganization of the sympathetic relationship between the two.
So if the ultimate is fractal, what could you relate this to that we have observed before, or that microcosm? I mean, is there anything that you could relate it to?
Yeah, it's similar to an electron going to the next orbit, the next shell. It's similar to a quasar becoming a galaxy. It's similar, you know, it's that pulse that occurs, you know, that pulse of life. The Big Bang is another example of it, if you'd like, you know. And so it is a fractal. The fractal relationship actually you can find everywhere, and all of the dynamics and all the systems we see in the universe would be a result of that pulse. And interestingly, recently, we have, for the first time, have been able to get data of what our solar system looks like inside the galaxy. And they were surprised to find that our solar system is in the middle of a bubble of nothingness in our galaxy, meaning all the material around our solar system seemed to have been pushed away on the edge of our far from our solar system. And they don't know why. The only thing they could come up with was that a supernova must have blasted right beside our sun that pushed all this stuff out. But that doesn't make sense, because if a supernova went off beside our sun, then we would have got pushed out with the rest of the stuff. And our sun is right in the middle of that bubble. So the only thing that could have done that was our sun doing the pulse and pushing all the stuff out. And when it did that, most likely, that's what generated all the plasma necessary to generate our planets. You see? And so now it's about to go to do another of these pulses. Now it could be a much smaller pulse. It could be a micro pulse in a fractal of larger pulse. You guys see what I mean? So it could fluff off just enough energy, release enough energy by doing these pulses, so that eventually it regains balance and goes back to normal. But even if it was minor in terms of the amount of the energy of the sun that would be released, it would still be a major event to people of Earth. And certainly we would start to observe a new quality of luminosity of our sun. Because when it does that, and interestingly, if it really does this, it's not unconceivable to think that it might actually become clear. I mean that now there's that many sunspots on the sun. Some of them are like 10 times the size of the Earth. There's a lot of black on the sun, right? Now, if it blew enough plasma, it could actually expose its black hole nature. And that'd be cool because it proved my theory. But in any case, if it did, it's not unthinkable that we would get 3 days, maybe, of darkness with no sun, while it is regaining balance and before it starts emitting electromagnetic light again, right?
Within the network of people that you work with, are there any activities to kind of mobilize human consciousness to tap into per se the consciousness that's happening with the sun to help understand the dynamics of the movement, and how can we on Earth, since we are all our synchronic points, to facilitate a good, easy movement so that we don't explode? As I hear you, I'm asking myself, well, is the sun going to explode and push us out and we all become dust? Or how can we work with our consciousness to facilitate a good transition to the next level?
Yeah, I've thought about that myself, and it's a good point. One thing that I really suggest to work with your consciousness and the sun is don't take it personally. Okay? That's first, on the list. Because when the sun is going berserk like this and flaring and all this, there's so much energy and there's so much, activity, there's so much stuff. It is affecting human consciousness. There's no doubt about it. When I was looking at this data, with Bill Bison, an engineer that has been recording the activities of the sun for the last 30 years, is an expert and so on. And his jaw was on the ground. He was like, oh my God, I've never seen data like this. And the first thing he said is, this is going to affect human consciousness. So don't, just flow with it. Try flowing with it. Just let go. don't worry if everything you say is completely misinterpreted. Okay? Don't worry if you get yelled at, and don't worry, don't, just try to let it flow and let it go. Everything is going to be in a state of flux, right? The other thing I would say is that if you're if you are aware of these changes that are going on in the solar system, you can start to actually synchronize your resonance pattern, your energy to it by intent. And that might sound very esoteric, but I think there's some validity to this. Meaning that you allow the change to happen in your body so you can adapt to the changes that are occurring in our environment. I think that this much amount of information, this much amount of energy coming at us is actually going to change our DNA structure very quickly. And we have to be aware of that and allow that to happen and go into sympathetic resonance with that. And if we resist that, there's a good chance we're going to get extremely sick.
Because you are, several generations ahead of the common person out on the street here, what efforts are you doing to kind of prepare yourself to be a messenger to larger numbers of people to assist them in this process?
Well, everybody has their own mission, I believe. Everybody is here at this time to do something very specific to assist in this change that we're going through. And for me, it's to bring a unified view of the universe and to bring a technology that will help us transition through these changes. For you and for many others, it might be completely different and supportive of each other, I'm sure. But basically, is to go into your center and to find your mission, to find what you're here to do. There is something that you're here to do, and to do it. Don't go around the pot, don't wait, don't do it. Just do it, And that's going to help the world. And commit to it. Do whatever is necessary to get it done, because there is very little time left. Go ahead.
For me, it's to make sure that that $15 million needed to complete your research is raised within the next 12 months. And I have an email list here for everybody to sign who wants to help me with that.
Awesome. Awesome. And we're going to see how the application of this theory... Yeah, we're going to take a... So everybody's like wanting me to get out of the physics bubble and onto the ancient civilization bubble. There's no difference, that's right. So I had studied many ancient civilizations for many years. I really did study it. I didn't take it, for granted. I looked into it. I found the I Ching. I found the Mayan calendars. I found many evidence. The flower of life, many different evidence of the 64 tetrahedron grid being implanted, the code being given all around the world. Okay? And it all comes out to the same thing. But I hadn't really looked at the Islamic, the ancient Jewish tradition and the Bible and all this. Amber, if you can find me my Bible. Oh, jeez. Oh, it's on the table. Great. So this infamous book, I definitely, the reason why I wouldn't look at this is that I had an aversion to it from my childhood. I had like terrible experiences with the Catholic Church, and I I was really, you know, it was like school, you know. And I really didn't want to have to look at it. I was determined I was going to study all the other religions first. And finally, and we didn't have time to go through all this today, you know. I've given week-long seminars, and even in a week, I don't have time to go through all this stuff. Some of the people here from Reno were at my week-long seminar in Hawaii, and that was fun. You all have to come next time I do one of these.
When?
I don't know. It'll be maybe this winter sometime.
Where?
Just get on my, in Hawaii. Just get on my email list, and you can all come to Captain Cook in Hawaii where I live, and we're going to have a great time. Swim with dolphins in the morning. I don't. Because I've been staying behind the scene for many years, because I'm building technology, but actually now I'm ready to go public, and you're going to help me with that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Now, so I've been studying ancient civilization for a while. You all have enough energy for this part? Yeah. Okay, there you go. Wow, you guys are in. All right. And so I was really kind of, you know, trying to avoid this part, but I got into it eventually, and I went to my local church, and I actually borrowed a Bible. And, you know, they give them away most of the time. I was studying this, and, you know, and I was thinking, you know, well, what is this whole thing about? And, you know, I started to study it deeper and deeper. I was kind of stunned to find out that Newton had spent almost 20 years studying ancient Kabbalistic esoteric traditions long before he wrote anything on physics. And actually, there is a book of his memoir that is from his own writing that says that actually all of the physics that he wrote, he pulled directly from the study of the Kabbalistic traditions. You know, that's amazing. Most people don't know that. And he actually made a whole map of the floor plan of the Temple of Solomon, because he felt like if we could understand the floor plan of the Temple of Solomon, we could understand the foundation of the universe. He was convinced that embedded in the Kabbalistic tradition was, and the ancient Jewish tradition, there was the key to the foundation of creation. And so he dug for many years, and he extrapolated all of his laws of physics out of them. Now, he obviously didn't understand some of the foundation of the Kabbalistic tradition, which eliminates the possibility for a closed system or for an isolated system. But in any case, I was surprised to find that. So hey, I got a Bible. One thing I knew is that from what I remembered from my education in the Catholic Church, God, according to the Catholic Church, was this old man with a beard, you know, sitting on a throne somewhere, and with a pair of binoculars and a 2x4, and every time you screwed up, it just hit you behind the head, right? So, you know, I was kind of terrified of that God very early in my life. And, you know, there was a lot of things about being afraid of God and all this stuff. So when I started my research, I was kind of surprised to find that actually the throne of God in Judaic tradition is not described as an old man with a beard sitting in a throne, but actually as a throne with a tetrahedron on it. And I thought, whoa, that's different. And then, there was like 7 angels, radiating into that tetrahedron. You got to realize as well that I didn't have time to talk about that much today. Actually, today my presentation has been a little bit all over the place. But, I kind of improvise every time because there's so much material. But one thing is that all the way through this investigation, it was clear to me that if you understood the structure of the vacuum, the structure of the foundation of creation, you could reproduce it in a technology which creates a resonance pattern between the geometry of space, the geometry of the structure of the vacuum, and the technology itself. And if you could create that resonance link, all of a sudden you would download a huge amount of energy from the vacuum itself. You'd build a mini black hole. And to build such a mini black hole, you'd probably need crystals, because crystals appropriately cut and appropriately resonated would be the perfect material to make that link, since crystals molecules, first of all, crystals are 70% water, and then the crystal molecules are actually tetrahedral. The crystal molecules are very coherent if you have good crystals, and if they were cut in the appropriate geometry of the 64 tetrahedron grid with the right gases involved, you could create those dynamics. Because of my studies of the sun gods, and because of my studies about the dynamic of ancient civilization, I had a really strong feeling that those crystals, and I'm going to tell you what it looks like right now. It's 64 tetrahedron grid inside a crystal ball. They're very small tetrahedron, and they're inside a crystal ball, and there's gases inside that ball. Okay? This is not some esoteric New Age crystal. Okay? This is highly technical, technological stuff. Okay? It's not like a raw crystal you grab from a mountain and start meditating with. Okay? Now, when I believe that many of the New Age people remember the powers of the crystals because they remember that technology. Okay? The first person that talked about Atlantis was not some psychic. The first person that talked about Atlantis was Plato. Plato is and was extremely respected. And we used most of Plato's stuff except the 3 books that he wrote about Atlantis. And when he wrote these books, in all of them he mentions that this is not some story, this is factual. And he says he got it from the high priest in Egypt. And he describes a very advanced civilization that has a source of power, which is later as well described by Edgar Cayce, has a source of power that they call a crystal of extreme luminosity, of extreme power. I believe that is the crystal that can be built, the crystal of Atlantis, to create a link to the geometry of space. Do you guys all follow this? I was starting to read the Bible, and I was finding these plates of the description of God, and with it came words like the throne of God was the crystal seat, da 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 da. Many references to crystal. Ezekiel in the Bible, the story of Ezekiel. Enoch, which is not a book of the Bible. The book of Enoch was found in Ethiopia. was never re-edited. It's translated directly from the original text. In both these accounts, they describe some kind of ship that shows up in a big cloud. And then they say a door opened and God called me onto his boat. And then inside it describes it describes the throne of God as crystals with rainbows all around it. You see? I think he was describing the power, the drive of that ship. So I was really intrigued. So I started to read the Bible, and as I read the Bible, I realized something. I realized something I had never noticed before. That is, that most of the Bible is describing, the Old Testament is describing I'm going to have to read, and I can't hold this while I'm reading. Thank you. Appreciate it. So that the Bible actually is describing something, the Old Testament anyway, is describing something that is very, very strange. When the Old Testament talks about God, it doesn't say, and God. It says, and the Ark of the Covenant of God. It turns out that the whole Old Testament is describing the comings and going of the Ark of the Covenant, except for Genesis, which describes the start. But you see, even when you read Genesis in the context of what we saw today, you find that actually it's describing something very similar to the account of Atlantis given by Plato. A civilization that develops with a very advanced technology and that allows them to live very, very long. In the Bible, there's chapters after chapters describing people living 600 and 800 years. Okay? And then eventually that society was flooded, which is what Plato said happened to Atlantis. So actually Genesis could be an account of Atlantis. I thought that was interesting. And so I started to study it more and more. And I realized that the temples of Solomon was built for only one purpose: to host the Ark of the Covenant of God at its center. The Holy of Holy, the power of all power, the Ark. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I didn't think that the Judaic tradition was about some object that they called the seat of God. So I was looking into it, and I was reading, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because in Genesis, it talks about the tree of knowledge. You know, Adam and Eve, and the tree of knowledge, and the apple, and so on. Well, interestingly, if you cut an apple in half, you get a double torus with a seed in the middle, which contains the possibility for a whole other apple tree, right? The singularity, which has apples and singularities and apples and singularities and so on. So I was reading that, and then I realized as well, this text, when this is in Genesis, it's 4:24. When men began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, plural, sons of God, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married them, any of them, and they choose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. That means they were not from the earth. Okay? And also afterwards. And the sons of God went to the daughter of man and had children with them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So, this describes the sons of God that came to the earth, so they were not from the earth, and had children with the women of the earth. I started to realize, wait a minute, was this planetary system seeded? It started to, in anthropology, we're missing a huge link between the ancient Neanderthal and so on, and the modern Homo sapien. And that link we're missing is getting wider and wider, more and more records we get. There's new skulls that have been discovered now that makes that link even harder to make. So I started to think about it, and I'm like, that's interesting. And so I continued to read, and then I got across something really that perked my ears. It was in crossing of the sea. Exodus, that's 13:22. By day the Lord went ahead of them. This is Moses going towards the Red Sea as he's escaping Egypt with all of the tribes of Israel. Moses was son of Pharaoh for 40 years before he realized he was Jew and decided to take the tribes of Israel out of Egypt.
Another 40 years in the middle.
Yeah.
40 years as prince, 40 years in the desert, then at 80 he decided.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when he decided he was going to go, and with the tribes of Israel, he was leaving, and all of a sudden the Pharaoh changed his mind and went after him. Well, I was reading this. Now, when the Pharaoh weren't going to let him go, there was this whole thing where Moses and the other high priest of Egypt were having like a battle of manifestation. The ones that could manifest the wildest, craziest things was going to win. So they had frogs raining from the sky. He threw his staff down and it turned into a snake. He got water, he got blood to flow through the city and all this stuff. But he won that contest. As I looked at the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible, the Ark that they call the Ark of God, they give dimensions of that box. It's like a box-like object that's got gold on the outside, wood in the middle, and gold on the inside. Well, that's a capacitor. A capacitor is an object that holds energy. When you charge it, just like a battery, it holds energy, except that a battery can only discharge the energy very slowly. A capacitor can discharge the energy in an instant. So when I looked at it, I thought, well, that's a neat capacitor. It would be quite large in capacitance. It would be a very high level, a lot of capacitance. It would have really high voltage. And it would be quite heavy. It would be a heavy object, extremely heavy. In fact, it would be way too heavy to lift up with two flimsy poles. It would weigh over 3 tons because of all the gold on it. And so There was problems with that, but I noticed that the dimensions that were given in the Bible for that box matched the dimensions of a box that was found in the remains of King Tut in Egypt. And then I noticed that those boxes were the exact appropriate boxes to fit inside the sarcophagus inside the Grand Pyramid of Giza. Meaning that the box size is a perfect fit so that you can lower the ark inside the sarcophagus inside the Grand Pyramid and then push the poles in without having to touch the capacitor, which would zap the crap out of you. So when you look at, and then I notice as well that the outside dimensions of the sarcophagus are exactly half, actually are twice the volume of the inside dimension. Exactly. Okay, so it's a perfect octave. And then if you measure the ark as described in the Bible, that's again twice smaller than the inside dimension of the sarcophagus. So now you have another octave. And then if you measure the inside volume of the ark as described in the Bible, you got another octave. It's again twice as big, twice as small. So it was a perfect fit. And I started to think, what would you want to carry in a capacitor like that? There must have been some extremely powerful energy source, energy device inside that capacitor. But the thing is that Moses supposedly didn't build that capacitor, didn't build that device until he was on the other side of Mount Sinai, on the other side of the Red Sea at Mount Sinai. When you read the Bible, you find that actually the Ark of the Covenant is always portrayed as a very, as this box-like object with its two poles, with some kind of extremely luminous object between the cherubim on top of it. And then you see that in the Bible, this object is always described with a huge, what they call pillar of cloud or pillar of light above it. A huge vortex. I had just finished elaborating the mathematics and the topology of the space-time manifold generating huge vortex at the north and south pole of those black holes. And if you were to build a small one, you would generate a vortex like that as well. So I thought that was interesting, but I didn't really have anything on it. And then I read something that boggled my mind. This is the crossing of the Red Sea. Moses is now going towards the Red Sea, and the Pharaoh has changed his mind and is going after him. Maybe the Pharaoh changed his mind and went after him because Moses left with something the Pharaoh didn't expect Moses was going to leave with. And here it says, on the way to the Red Sea, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and at night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. But you see, that pillar of fire and that pillar of cloud is always described in and on top of the Ark of the Covenant. Yet, here, they're not supposed to have the Ark of the Covenant yet. You see what I mean? So now I'm going, wait a minute. The box-like object that they're describing in the Bible might just be the carrying case for the power supply, which is something completely different, that generates the vortices and the singularity at the center. So I was starting to read this, and I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting, and I'm reading more, and it's saying that there's clouds above and there's clouds below and so on. And I thought, what do they mean by God? Right? Because they're calling it the Ark of the Covenant of God. So I did some research on that. Where is the word God coming from? What is this thing they call God? It's some kind of object. Okay? But what is this thing they're calling God? So I looked it up. And I looked everywhere and I couldn't find it. And finally, I found it in the preface of my Bible. Look in the preface of your Bible, and it will say where the word God was translated from. The word God was translated from the word tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton. Oh my God. That freaked me out. Oh my tetragrammaton, yes. That freaked me out. Every time you read the word God in the Bible, you can translate it to tetragrammaton. And so I was looking at the root etymology of the word tetragrammaton. It's like, oh my God, how can I find a word so close to tetrahedron in the Bible? And I looked at the etymology, and it turns out that tetra, which is four, right, was used for, and grammaton has a root word that can be grammar. So four grammar, or four letters, are taught to be Yahweh, the four letters of God. Yeah, Utevoti. However, when you dig a little deeper in the etymology of the word grammaton, it has actually a deeper root. And that root is four tetra, tetra, which is tetrahedron. Grammaton comes from the word gram, or gravity. Weight, it refers to weight, gram, and the effect of gravity. And that's where the word gravity came from, grammaton. So now you have a word for God, okay, that has the structure of a tetrahedron generating a gravitational effect. And I thought, well, that I'm pushing it, right? I'm sure, this is kind of wild. But hey, then I look up what the heck is the tetragrammaton in Kabbalistic tradition, and I found that it is an isotropic vector metric in 2D. Here is typically in Kabbalistic tradition the way God is represented. It's represented as isotropic vector metric. Remember, 4 faces, 3, 2, 1. It's like one face of the isotropic vector metric. And each letters of the word God has a number that goes with it. In Kabbalistic tradition, that's very important. Now you got to realize that the Kabbalistic tradition are the oral tradition of the Druidic history. These traditions were not to be written. They were not even supposed to be talked about. Only initiates could learn about these knowledge. It was thought to be the nature of God that was revealed. And if you understood it, you could understand God. So I was thinking maybe the Kabbalistic tradition is the explanation of what the power source inside that box is. That bright object. Go ahead.
I want to also mention I'm a student of Kabbalah, and
yes.
Yud means singularity.
That's right. At the center of the Kabbalistic tradition is that crown that unfolds onto itself to infinity, describing singularity. So I was puzzled with this. I found that the tetragrammaton, right, was actually generating the numbers. So each letter in the isotropic vector matrix is a number, and the Kabbalistic tradition tells you that the numbers are just as important as the letters. And so when you calculate the numbers, you get 72, which is the 72 names of God that's found in the Bible, or the 72 faces of God, right? So that all match. But this is a male God. We're missing half the equation again. Why is it that in many of these ancient civilizations, some of them we didn't have time to see today, we only have half of the code? Well, that would be because if you were an advanced civilization trying to put a code, embed a code in a not so advanced planetary system, you wouldn't want these people to be able to uncode or decode that code prior to being ready for that type of power. So you could code the code, or you could make the code only one polarity of it, like the male polarity of the code. And it wouldn't be until that civilization understood the balance between the male and female, understood the equality between the male and female, that they would be able to decode the code. And then that would mean that they were ready to do it. You guys follow what I just said? So basically, here you have to add the female god or goddess to the tetrahedron or to the isotropic vector metric. And if you did, you have the double of these numbers. And the result would be 72 plus 72, given 144, which is thought to be the number of ascension in the in Revelation. As well, in Revelation it says that the New Jerusalem is a crystal city with rainbows all around it. And that crystal city has faces of 144. There is exactly 144 faces on the outside of a 64 tetrahedron metric. Nice. I thought I was onto it. And so I kept on reading the Bible, and I got really interested now, you know. And I'm like, oh my God, this is all about the technology. This is all about Atlantis. And I kept on reading, and I found something that was extremely significant. And this has been completely omitted by scholars. This is long after, you know, Moses was following the ark through the desert. It took him 40 years to do a route that usually took only a year. Okay? I know this because my father, actually my grandfather, my father is Iranian, and my grandfather was a guide that brought people to Mecca from Iran. And it took him 6 months there and 6 months back in the desert. And so these routes were well known. And actually my grandfather lived to the age of 128. And I believe that it's because he went to Mecca, to the Kaaba, which held the black crystal, the dark stone, or the black sun as described by the Sumerian plates, given to man by the sun gods. But in any case, Moses is taking 40 years to do a route that should have taken a year. Why? Because he's following the ark. It's very clear in the Judaic tradition and in the rabbinic tradition that the ark is moving on its own. Whenever the ark lifts and starts going, they would lift camp and follow it. And whenever the ark would stop, they would stop and put a camp up. Sometimes they would stay there for 3-4 years before the ark would start going again. So this ark seemed to have anti-gravitic capability. It seemed to be able to hover. There's instances where they describe the ark lifting the high priest that carried it. So I'm thinking about all this, and then eventually, you know, Moses dies, and Joshua has taken the lead, and Joshua arrives at the Jordan, and this is where I found this really interesting thing. Joshua arrives at the Jordan, and the Jordan is running at flood level. There's no way they can cross with the tribes of Israel. They're trying to get to Jericho on the other side. So Joshua doesn't know what to do, and he asks God. And God says, Now, this is describing the high priest taking the ark and going into the water of the Jordan with the ark. And as soon as they put their feet in the Jordan with the ark, the waters are cut off. Okay? And then it says, you know, and then there's a whole bunch of other things. This is Joshua 4:22 for people that want to refer it. And the priests came up out of the river, carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner they had set their feet on dry ground than the water of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. So they went into the Jordan, sat there with the ark, while all of the tribes of Israel went across, and the water was stopped. And then as soon as they got out, the water started to flow again. Well, I thought that's interesting, because one evidence of gravitational effect would be to stop the course of water. But what blew my mind is what comes next, at the end of that chapter. For the Lord your God, they're talking about the ark, dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan just what had been done to the Red Sea when he dried up before us, when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. Wow. That has been omitted. Because this says that they used the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord to open the Red Sea with Moses. But in the section where they talk about opening the Red Sea, they just say Moses lift up his staff and open his arm and the Red Sea opened. They forgot to mention that the ark was involved with this staff. And so here they do, though. Here they make it very obvious that the power of the ark was used to open the Red Sea. That means the ark was not the box that was built at the foot of Mount Sinai after opening the Red Sea. The power of the ark had to be there with Moses before he crossed the Red Sea. And thus it was something else. The box was only something to carry it across the desert for 40 years. Probably he didn't have time to take the box out when he left Egypt. He just took the crystal. Go ahead.
Do you think Ethiopia has the Ark of the Covenant now?
I'm going to get to that. So, are you guys all following this?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was really excited. I was like, oh my God, this is really real. I mean, they're really talking about some object. And this is kind of tough to do, but we can, I started to look into it, and I found more and more evidence that the sun, that the ark was this crystalline structure. I found the Ezekiel text. I found the Keys of Enoch text, and I thought, wait a minute, what are they talking about? Well, I looked deeper into the Kabbalistic tradition, and when I did, I found that they didn't just give you like hints to what the geometry was. They actually said, this is the Kabbalistic tree, this is the foundation of all creation, and if you decode this, you'll understand all of the universe. So I knew there that they were giving us a really good key to what was powering the Ark of the Covenant, since the Ark was thought to be the seat of God, the seat of the universe. And the Kabbalistic tree can commonly be described as the tree of knowledge as well. The tree that was placed in the Garden of Eden at the center of our Genesis. So when I looked at it, I thought, what is this? And I started to read Kabbalistic tradition texts and all this. Oh my God, I got so confused. It was so confusing. There's so much stuff out there, and it's all philosophy. And I was really kind of not being able to find anything that was jiving, but I was looking at the geometry, and what I did is I plastered it on the ceiling of my van so I could lay in my bed and look at it in the morning, every morning, and I was trying to decode it. And really quickly, I realized that the bottom part was a tetrahedron, and that the top part was an octahedron. But I didn't know what this middle part was. This X with a box around it. I didn't know how to deal with that. And then I realized, wait a minute, this box here, this rectangle, fits in this upper rectangle. So I thought, oh, maybe they just took it and squashed it. So I took the top part and slid the bottom into it. And boom, the result was a tetrahedron and an octahedron on top, which is all of the vertices you need to generate the star tetrahedron with the octahedron in the middle. You guys see this? Only this, to generate this, all you need is a tetrahedron and an octahedron and all the vertices, and you can start building it. So I was like, oh, this is cool. As soon as you slide the bottom into the top, basically, as soon as you compress it, as soon as you collapse it, right, you obtain a 3D geometry. And then I realized that the Kabbalistic text said that there wasn't just one tree, but that there's four, and that they're attached at the crown, or at the root. Well, I assumed that they were giving us only half the code again, so that there would be 8 trees attached at the root. Well, if there is 8 trees attached at the root, and each one are decoded to give a star tetrahedron, as we just did, then the result is 64 tetrahedron grid. How do you know you've decoded it right? Well, when you're finished, you can actually plot the 2-dimensional tree right on top of it, and you have all the lines you need with its sephirots. The sephirots are these balls on the corner of the tree. The word sephiroth comes from the word sapphire, referring to crystals. And when you plot the sephiroth all around the tree, all around the 64 tetrahedron, since each tree has one sephiroth involved in the middle, each tree only has 9 sephiroths. 9 multiplied by 8, 72. I had come back exactly to the tetragrammaton.
You've got 2 other ways that you can do this.
Mm-hmm.
Top 3 are always considered to be separate and above man, and thus to be mapped separately.
Mm-hmm.
Center, the center and the crown, is in its own space, and the one space that's missing that you have filled in with your dark circle is da'at, known as knowledge.
Knowledge, that's right. That point, that's the esoteric sephiroth in the middle. That's right. I have shown this to rabbinic tradition experts, and one of them started crying. It's very significant. What scared me is when I was studying this, it warned over and over in many books that if you try to decode the Kabbalistic tree, most people turn crazy. They lose it. And I figure, well, you know what? I'm already crazy, so I can't go much further, so I should be all right, right? And so I just went at it, and it came out. So I was like in amazement that it was so easy. Now I did do an animation that.
In this animation, see the Kabbalistic trees coming together under the general active contracting forces, creating the 64 tetrahedrons of the geometry of space, forming the vector equilibrium at its center.
So here it is, again.
We see the Kabbalistic trees coming together under the general active contracting pulses, creating the 64 tetrahedrons of the geometry of space, forming the vector equilibrium at its center.
Thank you, Amber. And here's a Kabbalistic tree that was generated during the time that I was writing this up in a little journal I published. This was in England. But note on this little animation that when we look at it slowly, you can see. Can everybody see here how the tree actually compressed and becomes a 3D object. This is the contractive side of the event horizon, you see? And then when you're done, can you see how all the sephirots intersect all of, it gives you the exact correct geometry, giving you the 64 tetrahedron grid and the vector equilibrium in the middle. That's just fantastic. That's just fantastic. I was just mind blown. And so you can see that in the Bible, that all of the ancient knowledge of the Old Testament of the Bible is describing this technology, is describing this power. A crystal full of eyes, right? A crystal full of eyes, as described by Ezekiel, looks like this. The petals of the intersecting field of each tetrahedron generating singularity generates eyes-like structure, and certainly would generate a lot of radiance and a lot of rainbows if it's a mini black hole. And so I was looking at it, and I started to trace back the movements of the arc. And because we're running out of time, I'm not going to go into too many details on that. But the arc seemed to have moved from one place to the other, and every time it would move from one place to the other, the symbol of the star tetrahedron, the Star of David, would change name. For instance, the ark went to Zion. The star tetrahedron was called the Star of Zion. Then the ark went to Solomon. The star tetrahedron was called the Shield of Solomon. Then the ark went to David, and the star tetrahedron was called the Star of David. So you could actually map the geometry directly to the movements of the arc. So you knew that the geometry was directly related to the arc. And so I started to see more and more evidence of it. And I looked in the Bible further and further, and I saw that they actually brought the ark to the Temple of Solomon, and then they built a huge water container in the back of the Holy of Holies. It was called the Little Sea because it was so big. And they would charge the water with the ark. You see? And so I was very excited. I was like, because then I realized that all of the pyramids in Egypt, including the pyramids in South America and Mexico, had waterways that were diverted to go through it. All the pyramids of Egypt had waterways going from the Nile into the pyramid. So they were charging the water with the ark, and then they would allow the water to be used in the fields, and they would get incredible crops. And that's what eventually started baptism with that water, holy waters, and so on. And incredible crops. Every year at Yom Kippur, the ark would be taken out of the Temple of Solomon and brought to the waters that they would irrigate the fields with for the rest of the year. Imagine a technology that creates a huge amount of coherency in the vacuum state polarization, in the structure of space-time around it. Any material that's around there, and certainly water, because water is so malleable, would take that imprint, would go into high coherence, and start to be able to download much more life force than originally. So I started to, I could see how this whole evolution. So I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to give you, do you guys all follow this? Yeah. See, this is really like a step in a new understanding of what truly happened on Earth. I'm kind of going to give you the whole package because I just don't have time to go into the details right now. But it's pretty obvious and it's pretty evident that actually that object has been on this planet for many, many years. That the sun gods brought it to man, and the first account of that object having been brought to man by the sun gods is in the Sumerian tablets, which says that the sun gods came to the earth and met with man on top of a mountain, just like the story of Moses. And at the top of the mountain, they give them the black sun, a black hole. And the tree of knowledge in the temple in the Garden of Eden. The tree of knowledge is the Kabbalistic tree that we just saw decoded. The tree of knowledge was that crystal power that was charging the water and charging the food and generating the Garden of Eden. I believe that advanced civilization found this planet, and the planet was not very evolved. And when they found a planet that's not very evolved, they usually try to help it along. Why would they do that? Why would they seed planets? If the universe is a fractal, and the universe learns as a result of an open feedback of the fractal nature of space, then if you understand these principles, you would want your local universe, for instance, your local galaxy, to have the most amount of learning centers for the universe. Because more they would be learning, more there would be knowledge available for all, and more everybody could rise together. So these civilizations would seed planets all around the earth. Actually, I believe that that's why they still come here and take eggs and sperms from people of the earth to actually seed other planets with. When they get to a planet, they cannot put their gene directly into that planet. Why? Because that would be like bringing a tropical plant to Alaska. It's not going to survive, or it's going to create disruptions on the biology of that planet. So what they do is they take the highest species, the most evolved species on that planet, and they cross the genes with them. And that boosts the evolution. In our case, it produced the Homo sapien. And that's why the anthropologists are missing a link. You guys see this? When they give the ark power, the tree of knowledge, to Adam and Eve, the first cross that they had made, Eve figured it out. She was smart. She figured it out. This is why it's represented as an apple, the apple being the double torus. She figured out that this was a technology and it had power that she could use. She figured out how to use that power. And if you read in the Bible, it says, oh no, now man has become immortal. She figured it out, and she gave the trick to Adam. And since the sun gods had kind of, since Adam and Eve had figured it out, I guess they decided that to let them have that type of power right from the start. And that's what generated all of the evolution of Atlantis and Lemuria, described by Plato. I know this is a lot to take in all at once, but I assure you, it's not coming out of the side of my mouth. It is coming out of a lot of research. Okay? The evolution of Atlantis and Lemuria was flawed from the beginning because these people never learned about destruction. They had so much power so fast in their evolution, it became eventually corrupted. And then, according to what I've researched, a natural event occurred. A huge meteorite hit the Earth. That meteorite could have been diverted by the sun gods, but was not. Because our evolution had gone to a level where it was becoming dangerous for us to have that type of power, and the sun gods felt that it was time for us to learn about destruction. And it was time for us to have this 5,000 year period in which we learn about war, destruction, fire, and all this, so that we would eventually be ready to go back to the ark, go back to the power of the vacuum, but this time with the maturity that we needed in order to have this power. I believe we're approaching the return of the Ark of the Covenant. When you follow the traditions, you find that this time is when the Ark is supposed to come back. And when we see the evolution of the Ark, we find that the Ark had gone through a long chain of events that brought the knowledge all over the world. And actually, all of our evolution is based on the return of this power to our civilization. Because this power is the power that liberates us from the shackle of entropy and reductionism. It allows us to become centropic, to have infinite amount of energy, to have infinite amount of power. It allows us to regain our place in the brotherhood and sisterhood of the galaxy, and to re-enter in contact with advanced civilization that have been observing us for the past 5,000 years. But this time we have to figure it out ourselves. I followed many. Oh, my batteries are fully charged. That's right. So the ark in the Bible, in the Old Testament, is the technology. In the New Testament, Jesus, which actually true name is Emmanuel, which is mentioned in the Bible, Emmanuel is thought to be the living ark. Well, there's an interesting thing that happened there. You see, when the high priest had the ark in the Temple of Solomon, they knew that if Jerusalem was attacked, they would have to take the ark out of Jerusalem somewhere. So they had a B plan, obviously, for the ark in case there was something to happen with the Temple of Solomon. The Temple of Solomon was built as concentric walls. with the Holy of Holy in the middle. These walls were extremely thick, and they were to protect the initiate from the Ark of the Covenant. The initiate had to go through all sorts of initiation to eventually go from one wall to the other to get to the Holy of Holy. It was the largest temple ever built on earth. But during the 1st century AD, the Philistines took over Jerusalem. There was a B plan for the ark. That B plan was called the Dead Sea community. On the side of the Dead Sea, that was the Essenes. Now, the first person that talked about the Essene and that community was Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce, in one of his readings, said there was a community on the side of the Dead Sea that had written scrolls, and that we were going to find these scrolls. Now, when he said that, I think it was in the 30s, all the archaeologists said that was bunk, because there was no writing whatsoever about that society on the side of the Red Sea. There was no record of it anywhere. That was because it was the B plan for the ark. They weren't advertising. So when they took the ark out of the Temple of Solomon, they brought it to the Essene, which was a community of high priests that was constantly being made ready in case the ark would show up. Go ahead.
James, the brother of Jesus, was with the Essenes for a long time.
Well, I think that the whole family was with the Essene for a long time. The Essene recorded the coming of the ark. This is not my imagination. In the Essene scrolls that were found, you know that there was over 5,000 scrolls, or at least 3,000, scrolls that were found. There's only 100 that have been released to the public. One of these that was released to the public is a very, very eccentric scroll. It's not written on papyrus. It's written on copper. The copper that it's written on is the purest copper ever found on earth. There is no purest copper ever found anywhere else.
Hard enough to touch stone?
No. What does the copper scroll? Now, obviously, the copper scroll were written on copper to make sure it would survive the ages. And what did the copper scrolls talk about? It talked about the coming of the ark at the Essene community. It says literally that the ark came to their temple. And it describes where it hid all of the components that were kept around the ark. How many components do you think there was? 64. There is exactly 64 lines describing the components of the ark. Some of these components have now been found. It was oils and incense and stuff that they kept around the ark that were part of what you needed to be safe when you went into the ark room. You had to wear certain clothing. You had to cover your eyes. You had to have certain oils on your skin for the conductivity. All these things. Do you guys understand where I'm going there? Okay. If some of you read Elizabeth Heich's book called Initiation, note in Elizabeth Heich's book, when she's initiated in front of the Ark of the Covenant inside the Grand Pyramid of Giza. That book is extremely accurate. I've done a lot of research, I assure you, that book is extremely accurate. And she actually describes going towards the Ark, and she actually describes smelling negative ions in the air. So you actually, she's actually talking about the arc generating electromagnetic field and ionizing the air. Well, you know, they have now found some of the components around the Dead Sea Scrolls of the ark. And when they did, it turned out that they found, I don't have this picture, but they found the place where the Essenes say that they hid the ark, because they had it for a fairly long time. The place where they hid the ark was a cavern across from where they lived, across from the temple. When they opened that cavern, and this is research you can find on the net, when they opened that cavern, there was a there was a blue iridescent spot in the middle of it. There was NASA engineers, actually NASA physicists that were there at the opening of that cavern. They reported that blue spot being there, and they said something really interesting. They said, this is similar to the blue spot we found inside the Mayan pyramids when we first opened them. So they were making a direct relationship between the Ark of the Covenant, the effect of the Ark of the Covenant on the space-time manifold that left some trace, and the Mayan pyramids. And so, interestingly, when the ark disappears from the temples of the Temple of Solomon and goes to the Essene, at the same period, very shortly after, the living ark, Emmanuel, appears onto the scene. Emmanuel might have been able to walk on water because he had some anti-gravitational capability in his back pocket. Go ahead.
Well, in the Book of Mormon, when Emmanuel or Jesus visited the American continent after he left Israel.
Well, then he would have had to be able to do some pretty good flying too. And so, interestingly, Emmanuel is the living ark. Well, these things are related. Why? Because when we built the external Merkaba, the external ark, all we're building is a reproduction of our internal functioning. The inside singularity, the inside ark that keeps us alive. And so we're creating a very short feedback. That's why you had to be initiated very carefully before you could approach the ark. You had to be pure of heart. Because the feedback is so short that if you have destructive intent, you'll just die right on the spot. It'll bite you right back.
Aaron's sons.
So it's a fail. It's a yeah. Aaron's sons died that way. It's a very died that way. It's a very fail-safe system. You can't use it for destruction very much, because by the time you try to use it for destruction, you're already dead. See, it's nothing new. The universe is smallpox all over their body. They found out later that it wasn't smallpox at all, that it was tumors all over their skin. Like they had been irradiated by radioactivity. At one point, the ark is stolen by... The ark is attempted to be used for war and is taken by the Philistine before it's moved to the Essene, long before. And the same thing happens. They bring it to their temple and they try to use it and all this, and they all get tumors. It's in the Bible. And so they send it back to the Temple of Solomon. They're like, get that thing out of here. So Emmanuel was most likely born in the field of the Ark of the Covenant. And as a result, he had very advanced DNA structure. In fact, Emmanuel might have got revived by using the Ark of the Covenant and resuscitating him, generating the whole, return of Emmanuel, return of Jesus 3 days later. Well, when I was asked to talk about the Knights Templar. So you guys are seeing this view a little bit more. I'm going to tell you now how it reaches you, how far this goes, and how much the power at B is actually trying to get this power back. First of all, the key to the Bible is to understand that the Old Testament is talking about advanced technology, very, very advanced technology. The crystal, the power of the sun gods, the power of Atlantis, which was brought out of Atlantis, brought to Egypt, and eventually brought to the Temple of Solomon by Moses. And the other side of the Bible, the New Testament, is talking about the living ark, the purity of heart, the purity of intent you have to be with the ark. And it's actually when the two are put together that we have the new level of civilization. When the technology, the external technology matches our internal knowledge, and the internal knowledge matches the external technology. It is not all internal, like spiritual, commonly think of, and it is not completely external, like most physicists think of, but it is both internal and external. That's the feedback. So when much later, it seems like there was a Jewish contingency in France that believed that they were the direct descendant of Emmanuel, the Cathars. And the Cathars, I think, was it the Cathars? Yeah, I believe so. They were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. This is a large Jewish community in the middle of France that nobody knows how they got there. There's a lot of books now being published saying that actually Emmanuel, after his crucifixion and his revival, went through India and into Europe and resettled in France. And that Cathars were truly the bloodline of Emmanuel. In any case, true or false, they believed they were. And they were looking for the ark. They might have had very ancient documents that were brought there by the groups that settled the Jewish community there. They started an order of knights to look for the ark. That order was called the Knights Templar. The first name they were given was the Knights of the Poor, because they were very poor, and their insignia was 2 knights on 1 horse, because they couldn't afford a horse for every knight. They were commissioned by a priest, a Cathar priest, to look for the ark. Well, after years of research and so on, they came to conclude that the ark had to be in Jerusalem somewhere, under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. They conjured the armies of France. Okay? They convinced them to go and take Jerusalem. And as a result, started the Crusades. This is history. The Crusades were described in the tales of the search for the Holy Grail. They couldn't talk about the ark directly because of Inquisition. So they called it the Holy Grail. And in the first edition of that story, they call it a crystal stone. Later on, describing it as a cup, which had 2 vortices on each side. And so they went across all the countries they need to go across to go to Jerusalem. They fought their way through all the way, generating huge amount of difficulties, and eventually got to Jerusalem and took over the ancient city of Jerusalem. This is historic. They were there and they occupied Jerusalem for many years. For 7 of those years, the Knights Templar themselves settled right beside the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and dug and dug and dug tunnels that are still there today. But because this is Islamic ground today, the temple, the mount, it's the rock of foundation is right under the dome of the rock in Jerusalem, which is Islamic, is under Islamic control. The Islamic population goes there on pilgrimage, turn around the rock where the ark used to be placed inside the Temple of Solomon. They're venerating the exact same thing as the Jewish tradition. And they're all fighting. Amazing. In any case, those tunnels are still there under the ark, under the Temple Mount. They're not accessible. You can't go there. They are blocked and they're heavily guarded. In any case, the Knights Templar dug for 7 years and found zilch. Well, they found a lot of documents, and that's in history books, but they didn't find the ark. It just happens that while they were there digging, the king of Ethiopia was in exile there was a revolution in Ethiopia and was brought in exile to Jerusalem. And when he heard the Knights Templars were looking for the Ark, he went to them and said, I have the Ark. It's in Ethiopia. Now, how did that happen? There was a very well-known route along the Nile that went down the Nile, through the Blue Nile, into Lake Karnos in Ethiopia. Taos in Ethiopia. And sure enough, in Ethiopia, you find a high population of ancient Jewish tradition, which scholars never knew where the Jews came from, why they went to Ethiopia. Most likely what happened is that the Essene temple became unstable, became dangerous. It became dangerous to leave the Ark there. So they decided to take it down the Nile. They did, and they eventually settled at Elephantine Island on the Nile. And they found an Hebraic temple there, which, you know, in Jewish tradition, you're not supposed to build a temple unless it's the temple to place the Ark in. So wherever you find an ancient Hebraic temple, the Ark had to be there. So you find that temple in the appropriate times being built on Elephantine Island. And then it stayed there for a long time, hundreds of years, till it became unstable there too. So they brought it down into the Blue Nile, into Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, on that lake, you find a very ancient Hebraic temple having been built. And all the priests there say that they used to have the Ark. And then eventually the Ark was brought to St. Mary of Zion in Axiom, Ethiopia, where it's supposed to be to this day. It's a little chapel that's heavily guarded by the Ethiopian army. And so the Knights Templar actually went down the Nile, and what they did is they made a deal with that king. That king actually is the father of the Rastafarian tradition.
Wow.
That's how deep this goes. The Rastafarian tradition is actually directly linked to the history of the Ark. And if you talk to Rastafarians that are really scholarly involved, they will tell you that the Ark is the center of their worship. So the Knights Templar, isn't this amazing? The Knights Templar went down the Nile with that king, and because they had the control over the European armies, said, we'll give you back your country. That's not a big problem for us. We've got guns. They have, arrows and lances. And so they went down the Nile. Actually, they didn't have quite guns at the time, but they had more advanced technology than the Africans. And they fought for that king's country, and in exchange, the king gave them access to the Ark. And there, in Ethiopia, you find ancient traditions that talk about blonde hair, blue-eyed people, Europeans, coming during those years, liberating the country, and building all sorts of things. Now, when you find these things they built, you know they didn't build this with conventional means. Because when you find the things they built in Ethiopia, you find that those are churches. One of them is a church that's a big Knights Templar cross type of structure that is not built, actually it's cut into the stone, like laser cut into the stone. and then it's cut inside it, and then in exile to Jerusalem. And when he heard the Knights Templars were looking for the ark, he went to them and said, I have the ark. It's in Ethiopia. Now, how did that happen? There was a very well-known route along the Nile that went down the Nile, through the Blue Nile, into Lake Taos in Ethiopia. And sure enough, in Ethiopia, you find a high population of ancient Jewish tradition, which scholars never knew where the Jews came from, why they went to Ethiopia. Most likely what happened is that the Essene temple became unstable, became dangerous. It became dangerous to leave the ark there. So they decided to take it down the Nile. They did, and they eventually settled at Elephantine Island on the Nile. And they found an Hebraic temple there, which, you know, in Jewish tradition, you're not supposed to build a temple unless it's the temple to place the ark in. So wherever you find an ancient Hebraic temple, the ark had to be there. So you find that temple in the appropriate times being built on Elephantine Island. And then it stayed there for a long time, hundreds of years, till it became unstable there too. So they brought it down into the Blue Nile, into Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, on that lake, you find a very ancient Hebraic temple having been built. And all the priests there say that they used to have the ark. And then eventually the ark was brought to St. Mary of Zion in Axiom, Ethiopia, where it's supposed to be to this day. It's a little chapel that's heavily guarded by the Ethiopian army. And so the Knights Templar actually went down the Nile, and what they did is they made a deal with that king. That king actually is the father of the Rastafarian tradition.
Wow.
That's how deep this goes. The Rastafarian tradition is actually directly linked to the history of the ark. And if you talk to Rastafarians that are really scholarly involved, they will tell you that the ark is the center of their worship. So the Knights Templar, isn't this amazing? The Knights Templar went down the Nile with that king, and because they had the control over the European armies, said, we'll give you back your country. That's not a big problem for us. We've got guns. They have, arrows and lances. And so they went down the Nile. Actually, they didn't have quite guns at the time, but they had more advanced technology than the Africans. And they fought for that king's country, and in exchange, the king gave them access to the ark. And there, in Ethiopia, you find ancient traditions that talk about blonde hair, blue-eyed people, Europeans, coming during those years, liberating the country, and building all sorts of things. Now, when you find these things they built, you know they didn't build this with conventional means. Because when you find the things they built in Ethiopia, you find that those are churches. One of them is a church that's a big Knights Templar cross type of structure that is not built, actually it's cut into the stone, like laser cut into the stone, and then it's cut inside it and then emptied out. This huge chapel, right? Basically cut, like sculpted right out of the stone. Only one person has been able to interview the guardian of the ark today. One priest in Ethiopia is chosen to guard the ark, and he has to be pure of heart. And when he's chosen to guard the ark, he never leaves the chapel where the ark is. From that moment on, he stays there for the rest of his life. That high priest gave one interview, and he gave it to Graham Hancock, and it's in the book, The Sign and the Seal. And in the interview, Graham says, "What is the power of the ark?" And the high priest, well, first of all, he says, how was it the first time you went in front of the ark? And the high priest said, it was terrifying. And Graham Hancock says, why? And he said, because the ark is an object of fire. That means it radiates. And then he said, what's the power of the ark? And the high priest pointed across from the chapel in Ethiopia. And across from that chapel in Ethiopia are huge pillars, some of them 500 tons pillars of granite that were erected, just like Egyptian obelisks. And he said, this was not done with the power of man. This was brought here with the power of the ark. So he actually says directly to Graham Hancock that the ark has gravitational capabilities. Go ahead.
What do you think is...
Interestingly, when they arrived in Europe, the first thing they did is that they built... You see, all of a sudden they became builders. You know, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, they could build amazing structures. The first thing they built was the first Gothic cathedral, Chartres, a huge cathedral in France. Now that cathedral has been examined by many engineers, and all the engineers agree that thing is not reproducible with current technological advancements. I mean, you're talking whole temples, whole pyramids were covered with gold. You don't do that by mining in the middle of the desert. Okay? So, the arc crystal is the philosopher's stone that the alchemists were looking for. So when you start, now it starts to make a whole picture different, eh? The Knights Templar could not talk about the ark directly because the Vatican would have had their head real quick. So they had to talk about it in terms of magic, in terms of magical spell. They had all these ancient books that had description of the ark. They started to distribute those in underground, grassroots, sectors. And all these became magical texts. That's why you see all these ancient texts appearing in the middle of Europe, like the Kabbalistic texts. And the modern archaeologists and historians think, the Kabbalah came out of the 11th century in Europe. It's not ancient. And all the Jewish people are saying, no, this is ancient knowledge. Right? And that's because the historians are confused where the information came from. It came from the Knights Templar. And so they start to distribute this, and they became very powerful. they became very rich, and the King of France started to freak out. The King of France was losing a lot of money, and the Pope was getting very, very worried that the Ark was going to become public knowledge. And that would not be good for the Vatican. So the King of France, and this is a historic meeting, the King of France, the Pope of the time, and an Ethiopian delegation got together at the Vatican. And they all talked about it, and they decided they needed the Knights Templars out of there. Now it's no longer the 11th century, we're talking 13th century, the year 1213. On a Friday the 13th, which gave Friday the 13th this bad reputation, the Knights Templars were declared illegal. The order of the Knights Templar was declared illegal by the Pope, and the Inquisition striked at some of the largest temples of the Knights Templar. Many of the temples actually were dedicated to the goddess, to the Black Madonna. And how things work was brought through the ages, through these two enterprises, the Freemasons and the Knights Templar. And that's why in both of these traditions, you find and I did research this, they both say that their roots was the Knights Templar, and that their knowledge comes from ancient Egypt. You see what I mean? And they both have the highest level of initiation at the 32nd level of initiation. 33rd being, a complementary initiation, actually, because the 33rd is just when you get to direct a house in both of them. But the higher level of initiation in both system is the 32nd level of initiation. So the two put together generate the 64. And in both systems, the highest level of initiation consists of, and I've asked to both, consists of stepping in front of a mock Ark of the Covenant and making vows. So they still have the concept of the Ark in there. Well, when the New World was discovered, guess who came? The Freemasons. The founders of the Constitution of this country was written by Freemasons. And the whole layout of the Washington Monument and so on was laid out by the Freemasons. That's why you have a huge stellar in the middle, an Egyptian symbol. That's why the Pentagon is a pentagon. That's why the White House and all the area and all this generates a star tetrahedron. And that's why when you look at the $1 bill, you have a pyramid with an eye on it. And on the other side, if you have a $1 bill, check it out, you will see a star tetrahedron generated by 12 stars with a 13 in the middle. The vector equilibrium, the 12 vectors of the vector equilibrium generating the singularity, the 13 in the middle.